So welcome everyone. We're pleased to have you join us today attending Unscripted. So you're going to do some DE&I. We're very appreciative of your attendance today. We're doing this and our panelists are joining us as a service really to help everyone look at what it might mean to effectively launch or improve a diversity, equity, and inclusion practice right now. You know, one of the things we're noticing, and also my name is Jim Morris, and I'm the Vice President of Client Experience for White Managed Diversity Partners. I want to have our panelists introduce themselves in a couple of minutes, but just to set some context, business leaders and businesses around the country have been publicly condemning the racism that was sparked most recently by George Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter protests around the country. We find ourselves in an extraordinary time that is both tragic, but also creates an opportunity. And those are very paradoxical in terms of the reaction I have as a white guy, but maybe that some of you have as well. But often the business community has stopped there. We have a reaction, we make a public statement about it, but we're not sure what to do. Our firm has been literally overwhelmed with requests for support around how to start or develop a DE&I practice. And we're not experts at that actually, but we work with a number of clients who really are, and they're going to give us their insights and wisdom about what they're doing and what they have done to start and sustain their practices. So really, really glad you're here. Now, before we go further, we'd like you to participate in a short poll that will give us a little bit more of a clue about who's in the audience. Please pick as many of those answers as applies to you, if you would. We'll leave the poll up for about 10 or 15 seconds. Go ahead and fill it out. Okay, so about the 5-second warning. So let's go 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and thank you. So we'll talk about that poll more in a minute, but we want to, again, introduce the subject matter experts on this topic today who have joined us. So, and just again, panelists, thank you so much for being here. So Joyce.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Joyce Cooper, and I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion at Omaha Public Power District. We are an electric utility in Southeast Nebraska. I've been at OPPD for 14 years, and 12 of those years I've been doing the diversity and inclusion work, developing the strategy, and looking at what should OPPD be doing inside the company as well as in the community.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Lori Valle-Yanez. I'm the head of diversity and inclusion at Mass Mutual, which is an insurance company, financial services based in Springfield, Massachusetts. I've been with the company for 12 years, essentially came in to build their diversity practice and was the first person in the company to do that. And I've been in the diversity field, if you will, for almost 30 years. I'm gonna date myself, but.
Good afternoon, I'm Quentin Tyler. I'm the Associate Dean and Director for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Michigan State's College of Agriculture and Natural Resources. And my responsibilities are integrating diversity, equity, and inclusion to each part of our land grant mission, which is research, teaching, and extension. I've been at Michigan State for 2.5 years, and prior to that, I was Assistant Dean at the University of Kentucky in the College of Ag there, and worked in that capacity for about 13 years.
Thank you. Thank you all. Joyce, Lori, Quentin, thank you so much for being part of this session. And you know, this is a really complex topic. It's like we have 45 minutes to talk about how you develop a diversity, equity, and inclusion practice in organizations, usually large organizations like yours. Let's take a look really quickly at the results, if we could, and see what came back. 25%, not sure where to begin. 27%, not sure how to handle what's happening right now. 32%, I don't have the resources. The big one was 36%. No, that wasn't a big one, but just how to overcome internal barriers. Looks like most of you have executive sponsorship. That's great, because that's a big one. Mm-hmm. And just curious, panelists, any observations? Curious.
My observation is that resources are always short, and so that does not surprise me that with the work that's in front of us, it seems like we just don't have enough to get it done. And that may be part of the internal barriers. I would love to know more about that. So.
Yeah. Yeah.
Jim, if I could speak to the,
Yeah.
you know, I see what they're just curious is that due to the current situation that's going on, that a lot of people are really interested in learning and development and all across the board how to get their DEI efforts.
Right. Good. Yeah. Thanks. Thanks.
I just want to add that if you ever had any leverage, this might be the time to ask for what you want.
Right. Yeah. Great. Thanks. And the one thing I would add is about just curious, Paul, and also to your points, Quentin, is just real quickly from our standpoint, a lot of this work. Well, at the beginning, for those of you that don't know much about WMFDP, we see ourselves as a leadership development firm that works through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So to Quentin's point, this is very much connected with leadership development, this work, and the way that we approach this work. Too often, those things are detached. Leadership, equity, and diversity, equity, and inclusion. The more that those are seen as one in the whole, it can be really helpful. The other thing I'll say before I leave it back, I have a question for the panelists, is when people come to us and say, what do we do? When we actually get into a conference call with them, the first thing that we say to do is to stop trying to figure out what to do for the organization and start figuring out where you are with this work individually. It almost always begins with understanding for ourselves, where are we in this work? Where are we in terms of understanding of our own journey about being better inclusion partners, regardless of race, creed, sexual orientation, or gender? Where are we in terms of our understanding of our own blind spots and our own lived experience and how that has impacted the way that we think about and work about creating partnerships across difference? Organizations and leaders love this. They're great problem solvers. So they get with us or they'll talk to any of my colleagues here and they'll say, great, let's fix the system. And almost always the first thing we say is the system second, understanding yourself is first. And people go, yeah. But when we say it, we actually really mean it. Because if you're going after inclusion and diversity because it's something that has to be done like an initiative, it's not going to sustain itself nearly as well as when it's being led by people that are doing their own work on the topic. So panelists, I'd just like to open it up to you all. And incidentally, folks will be monitoring chat throughout. So as you raise questions, if we can, we'll try and address them. But I want to start off, panelists, by asking you a question, which is, so how are you doing with both personally and professionally? I mean, this is an extraordinary time. We're not all having the same experience. We're having different experience, probably partially because of where we live, but also because of our gender and our race. What are you noticing? How's it feeling for you, and what are you, both personally and also professionally?
So Jim, I guess I'll go. So, you know, I think, you know, and I have to speak to COVID-19 and the impact that it had on myself and my institution. So I think, you know, when that hit in March, you know, the period where, you know, I spent almost 2 months in isolation and by myself, right? So that was a period of trying to really understand what was going on, but also to provide support for many of the faculty, staff, and students. We had a sudden move to remote learning, to remote teaching, and remote research, you know, and I was thinking along the lines of how do I support those folks? And then when the situation that happened with Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, and actually being from Kentucky, it really hit home. So there was a period of pause, and then also a period of reflection. And when I talk about reflection, you know, thinking about my time as an undergrad and a grad student, you know, at my respective institutions, what have I experienced throughout the institutions, but also within society? And then, Jim, I thought about, you know, a period of action, you know, and the reason why I said action, I know there's a lot of students, a lot of faculty, and a lot of staff out there, and a lot of our internal and external stakeholders that need answers, right? And also support. So it's developing statements, providing learning and development, specifically regarding my experiences as a person of color, an African-American male in this country. So I spoke to a lot of that. So there was an uptick in requests for learning and development opportunities. There was an uptick in conversations. And then also just an uptick in authenticity. You know, people calling and people reaching out. But to me, it was all about balancing that, right? From a working standpoint, and then also just from a personal standpoint too, and how I can support people. In particular, Jim, I look at it from the lens of supporting fellow students, former students that I've had, that are working with the respective companies, and their companies may have put out statements, but it may not have been enough, or those companies that didn't put out statements and they're upset about that. So adding support for them, but also supporting myself.
Nice. Thank you. Thank you. Lori, Joyce.
Sure. I feel like we went from giddy up to whoa, where, we have been on this journey for 12 years. And I think the things that we've done have led us to be prepared for this time, where we are actually at a point where we can have conversations. And, I do in part to white men as full diversity partners. I have to say that we started having bold conversations on race 5 years ago. So then to have this happen at this time, it wasn't a big stretch for us to say, okay, now we've really got to double down on this topic and really take this work to, anti-racism type of work. And so I would say that we're prepared, but it did feel like we went from a giddy up to a whoa, where, like all the horses let out of the barn at the same time, all going in different directions. Because one thing I've been trying to do with our organization is I tell my team, this is a good sign. It's like people want to do things, they want to lead, and they want to be responsible and take action. And that sometimes doesn't land all that well. And, there may be things that they're trying to do, they just don't know exactly how to do it. And an example I could give you is somebody wants to hold a meeting about all of the racial issues that are happening, and they seek out the one African-American person on their team to, what do you think? And put them on the spot. And, those kinds of things. We're trying to give people the tools so that right away we put together facilitation guides and things like that. So we have gone from 0 to 60 in 3 seconds, and it feels that way. I look at it as an opportunity. It feels like people are ready, willing, and able to go. But they still need coaching, they still need guidance, they still need, we're trying to teach people how to fish. The initial request might be, can you come and speak to my team? And I'll say, well, it's better if you speak to your team. So here's some guidance on how to do that in an effective way, then the do's and don'ts and things like that. But so it's actually, I would say it's an they say never waste a crisis. It's an opportunity to actually turn it around to our benefit, making sure that we're putting the resources towards the things that we want to do. And as luck would have it, since we've been focused on transformative learning, I feel like we're better prepared to deal with the situation.
All right. Thanks, Lori.
Yeah.
Joyce.
I would say that I looked at what was going on with COVID-19, and 60% of the workforce went from being in the office to working at home. And what that did for me was it slowed me down. And I didn't realize I was running so fast. And but when they said, you've got to work from home, and now there's no travel, and now, the meetings are going to be virtual, that it was a good thing to slow down and to really learn what are other companies doing during this time, and what are they doing with their diversity and inclusion efforts, spending a lot more time with my team. So in that respect, it was good. I think the side of the pandemic of every day hearing how many more lives were lost it made it very heavy. And then, of course, they pulled back the curtain on the disproportionate number of Black and brown people that were dying and being positive, and then pulling back the health disparities and the economic disparities and the education and housing disparities. So then it was like, this is really big, and now everyone's focused on it. And so I would have to say there were many days of heaviness. And then with the murder of George Floyd, I was like, this is like a second pandemic of now looking at the pandemic of just systemic racism, and how that made me angry. And I thought, what I realized is that I had anger in me that I had not expressed, right? So George Floyd was not the first person to be murdered and to be impacted by police brutality. That it was like ripping the Band-Aid off, though, that this happens far too frequently, and this can't continue to go on. And then remembering, you know, experiences my dad had and my brothers, my husband, and so it's very personal, as well as look at what's going on in our country. And the hopeful part was really that everyone was outraged, or such a large number of people and such a vast diversity in the United States. They were like, no, we've got to change. This is not the America we want. And then to see the world support us in that. So I'd have to say, yes, a range of emotions from hurt and anger and overwhelmed to hopeful that change is coming.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you all. I want to follow up on those things for a minute, but I want to remind everybody to please use the question and answer. That's your way of interacting with us. That's how we'll know what you all want to talk about. And my colleague, Gwendolyn Van Dosselaere, is managing that. She's taking a look at it and she's feeding us questions so she can kind of stay in the mix with us. And I want to go back for a second to the question about, 53% of you are here because you're just curious. The way I worded that question when I created the poll, actually, now that I think about it, has an implication. Because when I listen, for example, Joyce, to you talk about the passion you feel and you hope everybody is outraged and you hope everybody, I can only imagine what it might feel like to feel as strongly as I feel or as you feel, to then read a poll that says, well, I'm just curious. Like, what does just curious mean? Does it mean that, like, are people feeling passionate about it? And I don't want to make assumptions about that, but it'd be helpful as we continue this dialogue, for those of you in the audience, to just fill us in a little bit on what does just curious mean? Like, hopefully it means more than I'm just passively interested, because this is an extraordinary time. And for those people that are managing DE&I practices in organizations around the United States, we would say that this issue of racial injustice and racial inequity is actually more than anything a problem that white people, those of us that are business leaders that are white, need to own and find a way to participate in, certainly in a way that's more than just curious. So there looks like we've got a couple of questions in. Let's pull one up. Yeah, so here's a question. We'll start with this one. So how do you respond? The question is, how do you respond to Black Lives Matter leadership at this pivotal moment in American history, and also ensure that leadership of Black and people of color is not pushed aside or co-opted, as it's being shown with the rush of solidarity statements and trending to ensure resources, leadership, and strategy support Black leadership? Anybody willing to take that on?
So Jim, I was thinking about, before we get to that, I wanted to address that just curious response, how I interpreted it.
Thanks.
What Joyce said, and Joyce said that she was hopeful. So to me, when I look at Joyce, just curious, I interpret that as people know they should be here, but don't exactly have the words to say why they're here. So to me, it's almost like that, that this blank box, let me just check that, right? And know that I'm supposed to be here. I don't have the exact words to say that, but I want to be in support. I know that I need to do something. So that's how I interpret it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Quentin. And one of the things I think about just in my own experience as a white guy is, I want to participate and I don't want to screw up. So I want to do it right because I don't want to make a mistake, which I think sometimes prevents us from just stepping into it and say, okay, let's get messy. Because I don't want you, for example, Quentin, to have to correct me because I did something wrong. I'd rather make sure you tell me what to do and I do it just right versus taking independent action, which what I've heard is that's not necessarily the only or best way to approach it. Thanks. Yeah.
Then also in speaking to the question that you asked, if I can interpret it correctly, I think it speaks to that as well. So I think a lot of times when people saw the solidarity statements that go out, and a lot of times I've received a lot of inquiry from folks, right? A lot of calls, a lot of emails. And the best thing that people could do in this time is just say, hey, I don't know what to say, but I'm here to support. you, and I'm here to whatever you need. And I think a lot of times, as leaders, we're expected to have all the answers. And I think, in this specific case, we have to, what I always say, we have to listen, we have to learn, and then we have to lead. And those are 3 points I think that we have to abide by in this particular situation as well.
Yeah, good, thanks.
The one comment I would make is, if I kind of get the gist of the question, is how do you make sure that the Black and brown voices are still heard in the midst of all these, the solidarity statements and people going beyond that to changing policies and things like that? What I would say is, 2 things have to happen. Black and brown employees have to use their voices. And I think what I've heard over and over again, and I've experienced myself, is that sometimes we feel invisible or feel not heard. And this is really the time, like Lori said, this is really the time to find that voice and to speak and to make sure it's being shared with the people that brown and Black people influence. And I think then, and just request, we need a seat at the table so that we're part of the solution and not you're coming up with solutions for us.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So for us, I would say that we are definitely much more in listening mode than we've ever been before, and bringing people to the table to test our assumptions. Because I think, even those of us in D&I, we're like, well, we know what to do. We've been doing it for a long time. And it's sort of the idea of let's pause and let's ask the question, are we missing anything from your perspective? So, the beauty of having business resource groups or employee resource groups is to test those assumptions out, bring people closer to the work. We actually have for lack of a better word, we're kind of instituting a Black strategy right now, and it's sort of bringing people to the table from across the business, looking at how can we elevate the things that we're already doing and just take it to another level. And let's make sure that we bring those voices to the table. So we have our chair of our African American resource group, which is called Passages, is at the table with us. We're all having these conversations just to make sure. And I think that's an important thing to do. If at this time, especially, it's time to bring people to the table to hear what they have to say.
Great. Well, I want to ask a follow-up question, Lori. If you see in the chats, and panelists, I'd encourage you just to look at the questions in the chat, in the question and answer column. But Lori, a follow-up question about employee resource groups. You can see it from someone. Is what's your experience with employee resource groups? Is there any room for allies? So at MassMutual, what's the allies approach around engaging with ERGs right now?
We have a very strong ally population, I would say, and we've been tracking our memberships of our BRGs over the years. And I would say that the big uptick started back after we went to White Men and Allies. So our leaders went to White Men and Allies. They came back and we said, go join resource groups, go learn, go contribute. And they all started to join our business resource groups. And that allyship has continued to grow to where some of our groups, they're more allies than actually members of that group, which is kind of interesting. Like, okay, that's another problem that we have to look at. Like, what's that about? But we're tracking it, and I just feel like the ally group continues to grow, and it's just an indication of kind of we're making progress. People want to know, they want to contribute, they want to be part of the community and learn from that community. So our BRGs have been very beneficial in that regard, and continue to be. I'll just do a quick story that our Passages BRG, during this time, we were all saying, what are we going to do, with the killings that were happening? And so going back to COVID-19 caused us to have to go virtual, right? The idea that, and what we discovered is that we actually can reach a whole lot more people that way. We used to have an event in an auditorium, and you'd max out, but this actually caused us to reach more people. And so our Passages BRG, we have a program called Brave Space. And the idea is that you're coming and you're actually talking about some of those, you know, having courageous conversations around diversity and inclusion. And so there was a brave space about what was happening out in the world with the killings. And we had over 2,000 people on the line and as a part of that. And it went really, really well. So, and that was our Passages Business Resource Group that actually was at the helm and leading that.
Wow.
By the way, that was followed up, I should say, that was followed up very quickly with an ally, another panel, another discussion around how to be an ally, because there were so many questions about what do I do? How do I be an ally? So we did a part 2.
Good, thanks. Thanks, Joyce and Quentin and Lori, but want to respond any more to that question or some of the other questions from the
Yeah, I'll make note that as part of, I work with a nonprofit, it's called Manners. I've been the advisory board chair of the organization. We work with a lot of different industries across the country. And one of the common things that I have is that, you know, folks will say, hey, you know, all of a sudden they're reaching out to us. And I don't feel like I want to talk right now. And I think, you know, as leaders, we have to be okay with that. You know, today or this week or this month, people may not want to engage as leaders or as participants or people that are involved in our ERGs. And we have to be, you know, understanding of that. They might not be the right time, but also we have to be consistent in our approach too. So we have to realize and not take it personal that somebody said no to our invitation. So we suddenly, you know, all of a sudden invited people in, you know, because people are looking at it from the perspective that it's been months and years that I haven't been invited in, then all of a sudden a situation happened and you want to invite it in to hear my voice. So again, it takes patience as well.
I know it's a fine line, right?
I'll make a quick comment that
absolutely.
our ERGs are involved, but we've also, the white male leaders that went through the White Men's Caucus, and then we have a program that just was open to brown and black people. They are having roundtable discussions and like 4 hours sharing their experiences in their labs, and then also talking about what's going on in our country today. And there was a question about overcoming barriers or resistance. For me, the key is collaboration and finding the people who do believe in it and who will stand with you, and that group tends to grow. And I would say it's finding the people who have a passion around diversity and equity and inclusion inside your company and outside your company. I would say for many years, there was lip service to support of DE&I. And so I found all of my supporters outside the company and built a support group around me and learned from them and what they were doing in their company, so that when my company was ready, I actually had those resources.
Great, thanks. There's a question coming up there. Gwendolyn's saying there's a theme around overcoming barriers. So what barriers have you noticed, or maybe more importantly is in your work, what barriers have you seen and been faced with that you've had to overcome? Because I imagine the audience is trying to figure out, you know, how do I get past, or how do I get over whatever some of the hurdles I need to get over are. And one of the questions that may not be one that you all want to talk about, but one of the questions is, you know, how do you engage white people? And there's a number of questions coming up about why is the white man running this panel or all that stuff. So it's like, what's the role of white people in engagement? You could go after that one, or more broadly, just what are some of the barriers that you think are top of mind that people have to figure out how to overcome, or that you've had to overcome in terms of bringing this work in your organizations?
You know, I'll go back to that poll that said that only 6% really were struggling with getting executive support, which I think is phenomenal. I think that's one of the key principles for success is how do you leverage your leadership, being the voice and articulating the importance of diversity and equity and inclusion. And I've done it both ways, where I've done D&I from the grassroots level, and now in the last, I'd say 5 years, from the top down, a white male president and CEO. And I can tell you, leveraging him to be the voice in a 80% male, 87% white workforce that it has been critical that our president and CEO speak up, what it means to him, why it's important to our company, and then, of course, the leaders that he mentors, it kind of cascades down. So it's extremely important that white males have are at the table and really own this.
We don't have enough time to talk about all the challenges. I mean, I'm just being honest, it's a huge challenge, because I think what all of us are trying to do is we're trying to change cultures. You're going into an organization and it's a huge ecosystem, and you're trying to influence that entire ecosystem, which is not for the faint of heart, right? It's a very hard job. And, you know, and I think Mary Frances Winters said, she has a book called Nobody Likes Change Except for Babies, or I'm saying nothing wrong. Nobody likes change. So lots of challenges, and especially around, I like you, Abigail, I had 100% leader buy-in in terms of our CEO. He has been unwavering in his commitment for all of this time, and is actually keeps kicking it up a notch. But that being said, it's not just the CEO that you need to influence, right? And it's everyone else. So I think there are so many challenges, but what I have had to do, and you know, the thing is that you're trying to influence the ecosystem, and you have to understand that you can't do it all at once. That becomes the challenge. And so I've always decided, at least early on, it was work with the friendlies. You know, if there were people that were willing to be on board with you, and in my case, it was I partnered up with our head of marketing, because there was definitely a belief that there was opportunities from a customer perspective, and he became my partner early on, you know, and that was great. He's no longer with the company anymore, and it's kind of interesting because, you know, you lose a person with a lot of passion around something, and then that energy sort of wanes, and then you go to another area where you have more energy. So I don't know if I'm answering the question. I'm just saying that there's a lot of challenges, and I think you need to have, the most important thing for me has been, how do I at least work towards leader partnership and alignment? How do you get alignment? And so that everyone that's at the table from a senior level position, that they all agree that this is important. And then the interesting thing is, even though everybody says it's important in the room, they may not behave that way out of the room. So that becomes really the challenges, and you've got to pull whatever lever you can get to. And some people it's a compliance lever, some people it's a data lever, you know, it's putting the data. I've created a lot of transparency. So there's a lot of transparency in my organization, which is
great.
We're going to put the data out there, and we're going to look and see where everybody is side by side. Take every lead side by side.
I'm sorry, Lori.
Go ahead.
Go.
Yeah, so, you know, at Michigan State, you know, we have some of the best teachers, researchers, and those who conduct outreach in terms of our Michigan State extension. And with COVID hit, that's an additional pivot that people have to make. And a lot of, when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion work, people think that's something extra that they have to do in addition to their regular responsibilities. And these folks are already working hard, they have a lot going on, so they think of that. And what we're trying to do is frame it around, this is not something extra. Initially it may be, but the long-term results are even greater. So understanding the value that comes with diversity, equity, inclusion work, and that comes from education on our part, right? Educating those folks and making sure that they, you know, they feel comfortable within their skin. In addition to that, I think a lot of times, a lot of barriers is people trying to figure out where is their place in diversity, equity, inclusion. So a lot of times, you know, that, and to me, that's establishing a common language, right? So folks think of diversity, equity, inclusion work specifically as it relates to race and ethnicity, right? Or even gender, you know? So again, it's expanding the definition, looking at intersectionality, and how we all have a role to play in diversity, equity, inclusion, all looking at the value. In addition to that, we talk about white men. So my leadership, you know, they were in partnership with WMFDP, actually before I took the position. And as an African-American male, you know, I was thinking, Jim, what is with this white man's full diversity training? You know, what is this about? Actually, it came from the top. Our Dean, Ron Hendrick, and sent all of our leaders to this leadership training. And it came back with a common language, and also conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion already. So again, when I started meeting with these leaders, you know, we already had an establishment, a connection, and ways to move our organization forward and think about diversity, equity, inclusion, and integrate it into everything that we do.
Yeah, that would be the view from the cheap seats, everyone. One of the things we notice is Quentin, to your point, when organizations tie diversity, equity, and inclusion to their values, to their strategy, to their vision, and to the way they do things on a daily basis, when equity and inclusion is an agenda item on teams weekly or monthly or however often they're meeting, when they're talking about those subjects and that work and these themes are embedded in the business strategy as part of the success factors for the organization, it's so much more effective than if it's like, well, you know, all this has happened, we better get on it and do something, you know, to show that we're concerned, versus really taking an approach that ties it to values. What else are you noticing in the chats that's coming up, panelists, that might be interested or you called to respond to? I'm noticing a lot of stuff while you're looking. I'm noticing a lot of stuff around doing. Like, what do we do? What do we do? Where do we start? What's the first move? What's the program look like? You know, of course, I'm sure everybody on this call knows that there is no one way to get there. There are lots of ways. And a lot of it depends on the situation. Yeah, go.
Jim, yeah. I'll go back to something you said, and it's something I actually didn't start my journey and working on DE&I by looking at myself. But I think that's where you start. You really do. Why is this important to you? And educate yourself so that you're grounded. I got there, but I think that's where you start. I think it's also talking to your leadership. Why is DE&I important to them? And what are their priorities? Because, you know, there are a lot of tentacles to this, you know, from recruiting to, you know, hiring to interviewing, and then hiring, then developing and retaining, and what's the brand of the company as it pertains to the customers they serve. And so I think it really is going, all right, what are all the buckets that need to be part of the DE&I strategy, but what's the priority for the leadership? And once they get behind you, then you can begin to come up with, you know, very specific things, you know, the actual actions around those strategic pieces. But I think that that's really important, is to educate yourself, find out where your leadership's at, and then begin to find where is your circle of support, whether it's in the company or outside the company.
Right, thanks.
And Jim, I would definitely agree with that. I think it definitely starts with, you know, a feeling within yourself, you know, and that may be initiated by, you know, situations that recently happened, the George Floyd or something. Again, we talk about just being curious, right? Just being curious on what's going on, wanting to know more. And then also the next step is coming from awareness. So being aware of what's going on within your own company or organization, also what's going on in terms of awareness in society. Then also, the next step to me is informal conversations with those leaders around you, but also even those that you may share a desk right next to you, right? So, hey, you know, I saw this happen. What are your thoughts about this, right? And then it starts with a lunch and learn. It starts getting larger and larger informally. You're bringing it up. And then it starts with, you know, again, getting supporters amongst the leadership. And then to me, the next step is even sending out just a climate survey and seeing how people are what's going on, how people are feeling. Then based on that survey, you know, you get interest in terms of forming, you know, a DEI task force, a DEI committee, or looking at specific initiatives, looking at your supplier diversity, looking at who you're not supporting or serving externally. And then also in your community outreach, you know, are we providing dollars to the right organizations or groups and providing help from that standpoint? So, man, again, it just starts internally. Small conversations. Hey, did you see this? You know, or did you see this in terms of relating it to sports, athletics, if that's your connection, relating to all different types of things that's going on. And I think that's how you build up.
All right, thanks.
So for me, I would say that I started with, you know, doing an assessment and collecting the data. Where is the organization from a D&I perspective? And probably for the first time presenting it to our senior leadership. what does our organization look like? And, looking at the demographics of our organization, looking at the demographics of our customer base, looking at our suppliers, what's the current state, and sort of bringing that back. And then, it's what does good look like? So, one of it is, what do our competitors do? So if there's any data I can get my hands on of where competitors are with respect to their representation, then I use that information to show maybe how far we have to go. And that's a constant thing. I would say I'm always trying to assess where we are with respect to competitors, best in class, how do we compare to availability data in where we are located, and when we're hiring people. So for me, it was starting with the data, presenting a framework, certainly working with our leaders to get their perspectives. I wouldn't have even taken the job if I had interviewed with the CEO, which I did, and he told me he didn't care about this topic. I just wouldn't have taken the job, right? I think that's important. We talk about the senior leadership support is very important. So knowing that I had his support, knowing that I had the head of HR support, then it was really like getting the information from them. I know what I think is important in a D&I strategy, but I don't want to put it on a piece of paper and tell them that's what they have to do. It's more like going and doing those interviews, I think Quentin is talking about, asking their opinions, and hopefully they're going to tell you the things that you want them to say, and then you could say, this is what you said to me, right? You said these things were important. And then, that's how I started the journey, is really, and continue that way, is always doing an assessment. There's an assessment that I use. It's just a benchmarking on global diversity and inclusion benchmarks that will tell you what good looks like, along the entire ecosystem of D&I. So you're also like one of the more recent chapters is about sustainability, people looking at sustainability, and there's information in there about what that looks like from what the best in class looks like. So that's how I started and continue to drive it. And it's, I would say one of the cornerstones of my strategy around D&I is flexibility, experimentation. Not everything is going to work, and taking some risks. So back in 2015, when I brought in white men as full diversity partners, people were a little freaked out about it. We were like, what is it called? White men and what? What are you doing? And I think, taking a risk and having the CEO take a risk with me, which was awesome, because he said, oh, I don't know if you know this, Jim, but our CEO and our executive team were the first to go through as an intact team to the white men as full the white men and allies program. But yeah, because there's not one way, and I think you have to. I've sort of changed up my strategy 4 times. Sort of like, what do we need to do now? What do we need to do now? And now's another time. Right now is another time we need to look at our strategy and say, is it working, and what do we need to do a little bit differently because of everything that's going on?
Hey,
right.
Jim, I'm seeing some really good questions in here.
Yeah.
They're great questions.
There's some great, so I wanted to address one. In corporate environments, being the only Black person creates invisibility. In other situations, all eyes are on that person and can be intimidating to speak up for fear of retaliation or isolation. And true. And so the person who is the only one has to sense what is the appetite, what is that they have, how much courage do they have to speak up.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also say that's when if there are no one that they can align themselves with within the company, find that support outside the company to begin to talk through how much do they want to step forward and use their voice and come up with solutions. But I do think that finding that support is important. There was another one around.
If I could speak to your on that.
Yes.
If I could add something to that. So through my work with the nonprofit, we work with a lot of corporations and companies as well as a diversity organization. And we come across a lot of folks that may be the only one in the organizations, but that's why it's important to have organizations that you partner with that may be community-based and they can speak on your behalf. This is what we're hearing generally, right? Without fear of retaliation. I think that's important. And then also from a university standpoint, that's why it's important to have folks such as Lori, Joyce, and myself in our respective roles, people that you can trust and come to, and all of my conversations that I have with each of my stakeholders are confidential. So, I report to the leadership and say, hey, this is what I'm hearing, right? And if we care about inclusion in our climate, this is how we move forward and support these respective individuals.
That's great. I want to just amplify what both of you said. I think in different ways, it's really important to be, and you're doing it, is to find allies and to promote allies and to use them. The other thing I'm learning about this work every day is there's a difference in speaking for somebody and speaking with somebody.
Mm-hmm.
My natural tendency is to overuse the privilege and authority I have because of my skin color and gender, and to say, well, what Joyce means is this, instead of saying, wait, Joyce, would you say that again? I want to make sure I understand, because you're saying something that's important. We tend not to take a partnership orientation sometimes. We take the kind of rugged individuals. You're asking for heroes as allies. You're asking for partners. Yeah. What else comes up? What are you noticing?
There was a question about an ERG having wanting to focus on anti-racism. Have any of your organizations? We have not, but I'll tell you what has happened is not only is OPPD really focused on the DE&I work and have been, but the city is, and this is before all the pandemics. And so what has happened is that Black ERGs from across the city have gotten together and started to form how can they kind of push the agenda forward for anti-racism and inequities and things like that. And it kind of goes to what Quentin was saying, is that there's really power in partnering outside of the organization. And so I would recommend that have your Black ERGs find other Black ERGs in the city and see if they can work together to do something.
And if I can add, at the university setting, we are working and doing anti-racism work. In addition to that, we've worked with a lot of community partners. In particular, just recently agreed today to work with our police department on anti-racism work. That is going on.
Great.
That's great.
Great.
So there's a question here directed to me, so I will attempt to answer it. It's, how did you manage a courage discussion around diversity and inclusion? What kinds of questions did you ask? What were the resources were shared? And the 2000 attendees, did you have much dialogue and questions? We did. We ran out of time. It was supposed to be 90 minutes. We went for 2 hours and could have continued to go on. I want to say that D&I has been, I keep saying I know everybody says DEI. I'm still not used to that. I say D&I, I mean DEI. We have been part of a cultural evolution at the company. And the things that are happening in the evolution of the company happen to complement the work that we're doing with D&I. And D&I is central to that cultural evolution. So as it would have, and I've been trying to really work to integrate things into things that already exist. So for example, we have leadership competencies at the company. And if I had a say in it, inclusion was going to be a part of that. And inclusion is a part of our leadership competencies. Another one that's very complementary was courage, right? So we added courage into the leadership competencies. And so they now become expectations for anybody that's a leader in our company. So the courage discussion we've been on for a while, and I think it's really, I have to tell you, we went from a place of, it's an insurance company. It's risk averse, right? So that's the whole point. There's risk aversion in the culture, and we still have challenges around that. But I think it's becoming more and more acceptable. And there was a time, I have to tell you, when I introduced the program, which to me is a transformative program, was the White Men and Allies that we've been talking about. Everybody was really afraid. So I don't want everybody to think, oh, it was a piece of cake. You guys, what did you do? It was honestly my willingness to put my neck on the line to assure our leaders that this would not be a waste of their time to spend this time there. And it was courage on a lot of, my boss had to be courageous. My boss, because she was the head of HR, and she was nervous, and she started calling everybody, calling other people. So courage has been a part of it, and it's now ingrained in our culture. We're not there, I would say, but we're getting there, and it's role modeling courage, role modeling the difficult conversations.
Yeah.
Starting with myself. So that's starting with myself. If I'm going to put my neck on the line to have this conversation, right? Let's have it. So what kind of questions did we ask? Honestly, the start of the dialogue, if you're talking about the brave space started with personal stories. We wanted to create a forum where Black voices could be heard. And that's what it was. That was the number one priority. In fact, we had a couple of folks chime in early on saying, and it was like all about them. You know how that is, sort of like, I'm an ally and I'm a blah, 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 this kind of thing. And we sort of said, like, we really want to create the space for Black voices. That then created a ton of questions that we had to do that second event about. So,
Right.
yeah, I don't know what else to say about it.
That's
But
awesome.
yeah, we're in a good
Yeah.
space right now.
That's awesome. I want to, panelist Gwendolyn just shared with us a potential final question. I want to just put a plug in for what all of you are talking about, particularly you, Lori, and Joyce, around talking to people and hearing their stories, and that listening process. That's data. And I think one of the things that gets conflated in organizations is like, well, where's the data to show that this is something we ought to do? Where's the data to show that it's effective? Where's the data? Where's the data? The data is the dialogue. The data is the dialogue. Like, and as a white guy, I've discovered, just in terms of gender, for example, I show up at work and I go, we don't have a problem with gender in our organization, or I don't notice anything, and that's only because I don't notice it. But if I were to talk to some of the women colleagues I work with sometimes, and say, so, what's difficult for you about navigating the organization? What we frequently hear is like, nobody ever, treats you the way they treat me. So every day people are experiencing the data. And if we collect that information and learn how to share it across the organization, that's really, really helpful. Because those voices are the voices sometimes that aren't heard or aren't being seen. Yeah. So,
And Jim, if I could add something to data.
Yeah, go, please.
Data. So to me, it's also about your future talent. So working at an institution of higher learning or providing people with jobs and opportunities. So one of the most common questions I've always received from my current generation is, how do I look at a company and see if they value DEI? That's the most common question I get. People actually care about the environment in which they're coming in.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, good. So the last question I'm seeing here, and it'd be great to see what all of you have to say about this, is what to share with the participants. What we're going to, let me see, where is it? Oh, what's the main culprit in lackluster DEI initiatives? What should people look out for? What are the pitfalls, the traps, the things to be aware of?
Lack of commitment from the top is one, from your leadership, and also a tendency to go towards, let's have a potluck, or let's, share dishes, which to me, it probably has its place, but it doesn't move the needle for DEI.
Mm-hmm.
So make sure that there's some really concrete, there are systems within companies. I looked at my own company, and we have systems of hiring, systems of who's going to get developed and who's not going to get developed, and being more transparent. So look to see, how are those systems being opened up so that more people have access.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Joyce.
So from my perspective, it's the lack of collaboration. I think, I always, the DEI office or it's not going to be your largest office. So you have to have collaborators, right? So you got to understand the importance of working with people in different units. So if you don't see collaboration, and then also, as Joyce mentioned, if you don't see DEI, a common language, and then also the non-toleration of exclusive behavior and language.
Lori?
Let's see. What are you trying to look out for? I think you need to, like I said it before, it's sort of working with the friendlies, know where there really are true champions that can help and support your work. You know, who are going to be in your corner, who are going to do the things that are going to be helpful to creating more inclusion in your organization. What I didn't spend time doing, and maybe it was the wrong thing, because others might disagree with me, I didn't spend my time banging my head against the wall with somebody who really wasn't there and was not going to be there, you know? And so then I would go somewhere else, because there's always plenty to do, always more than we can actually manage, because I'm sure all of us have very small teams and we're trying to influence a large organization. And so go where the friendlies are. That'll give you a lot to do. And I think spending a lot of time on the foundational pieces. I saw somebody said something about the business case. For corporate America, you've got to start there for sure. You've got to start with the business case. Why is this important to us as a company? And then you've got to lean into the harder things, which is really around inclusion. You know, how do we create a culture where we embrace difference? Because I think early on in the game, it was not a game, but early on in our journey, it was, okay, you could look different, but just don't be different, you know? And so, and you know, and you have to keep pushing that, that we actually had a offsite with some leaders, and we were joking about a blue-haired artist. Like, would the blue-haired artist be comfortable here, right? And right now, if you were walking our halls, if we were back in the office, you would see a few people with blue hair walking around. And I would say, yeah, you know, this is progress. So. Yeah.
It looks like we have another couple of minutes. I want to just remind the audience that we will be sending a follow-up email. You've asked unbelievably good questions. I mean, panelists, I'm like going, whoo, these are great questions. And we've barely done many of them justice, but we're doing our best. And we will provide some follow-up information. Panelists, are you willing to have the audience, if they want to reach out to you for additional contact, follow-up and stuff?
Sure.
Definitely.
Yeah. Knowing that you are now among the busiest people on the planet, and probably have been, right? Yeah, it's like, sure, I got extra time. Yeah, but it's good. It's good.
Yeah, just be patient with us. It may not be like please. Within 24 hours.
Yeah. And one of the things I've noticed just in terms of pitfalls is the predilection of diversity, particularly in new practices and organizations, the predilection of people in your roles to feel like they have to do it themselves, that it's on them. It's on the organization. As soon as it becomes on you, then the system will let it be on you, right? It's a systemic issue. It's a systemic opportunity. It's something that we all have to own, not just the person sitting in the DEI seat, right? And all of you have done, I can tell, I've done a fabulous job of building great partnerships with others who can lift up and support the work so that it is the work of the organization. That's super important. Final comments.
I would say this work is noble work, and it's really about creating a space where everyone feels included. It is a, it takes a while. You're trying to change hearts and minds, but it's really gratifying when you can see that more people are at the table and more people feel included, which then translates to more contribution to the company and the community.
Thanks. Thanks.
I would just add that. Go ahead.
Now, I was just going to say, if your intent is to lean in and do this work for a career, the advice that I will give you is the advice that my mentor gave me early on and continues every time I take a new job. He always reminds me is, you know, remember, Lori, the day that you care more about your title and your pay will be the day that you will no longer be effective in your role. And I have taken that with me because that means that I am willing to take more risks when I know it's the right thing to do. And I think for those of you that are contemplating DEI as a career, I think that's an important lesson, at least it has been for me.
Thanks.
Jim, I would just say a couple of things. First, it's a journey. Understand that it's a marathon, not a sprint. Also understand that DEI work, to me, I say it's the people's business. It's all about learning and understanding people and supporting people. So keep that in mind, and I think you'll be successful in what you do.
Thank you. Well, all of you, Lori, Mass Mutual, Quentin, Michigan State University Department of Agriculture, Joyce, Omaha Public Power District, thank you so much for being part of this. It's like we could have taken 4 hours. Look at the questions. We could be here all day. We could be here a couple of days. And your experience and knowledge and the things that you continue to learn are really inspiring. It's great to hear what you're doing. And what I'm noticing is it's also different, right? Your responses are different, but they all lead towards the same themes, which has just been lovely. Also want to thank Gwendolyn Van Dosselaere, who organized all this. She's our leader in this, and she's been feeding us questions and kind of keeping us on track. Thanks, Gwendolyn, and also my colleague, Abigail Hoyer, who's been producing this session and managing all these logistics to make sure everything went smoothly. Again, thank you to all of you, and thanks to all of you who attended. Again, we'll be following up with you. There, you have an invitation from the panelists to follow up with them specifically, and keep doing the good work. And we so appreciate you being here with us to talk about this important topic together. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thanks, everybody.